Sven, good morning.
Good morning.
Please let me introduce you to our audience in Italian for 2 minutes. Thank you. Allora, Sven Oehme, buongiorno a tutti intanto. Sven Oehme è il nostro interlocutore di oggi ed è, oltre ad un notissimo avvocato newyorkese, anche il presidente di un'organizzazione molto importante, questa organizzazione che si chiama EABO, per la precisione, e cioè la European American Business Organization. In realtà che tipo di attività svolge? Svolge proprio quel tipo di servizio che è tanto caro alle società italiane, europee in generale, e cioè un servizio di collegamento, no, tra i mercati europei e i mercati americani per quanto riguarda appunto lo sviluppo delle società, no, e le vendite nel mercato americano e così via. Quindi non abbiamo un interlocutore qualunque, ma abbiamo un personaggio di grande spicco all'interno del panorama economico americano che è in connessione spesso anche con l'Italia. Ecco, adesso noi andremo avanti ovviamente con l'intervista a Sven Oehme in inglese e ci sentiremo alla fine dell'intervista per una breve considerazione che vi farò. So, Sven, if you want, let's go on.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. First question, how will you compare the EU regulatory approach regarding the AI applications in international trade and business in respect to the USA approach?
Yeah, first of all, from my side, good morning, because it's just after 10 in New York City, a beautiful day, sunshine. And
I am happy.
late summer day, so to speak. The approach in Europe is different from the American one. The Europeans always want to regulate everything, even before it is really in effect. The Americans have a more relaxed approach, and for instance, the President Biden at the end of October signed an executive order, which meant that, or means that the various agencies of the US government, and obviously there are also many, as in every bureaucracy, that they review how AI is affecting their activity. So it goes from the Department of Commerce to Department of Defense. So it's really, I think, about 25 organizations that have to review the AI effect on their institutions. And then they will eventually evaluate, and that may lead to consequences in the US that some rules are established. It may also, depending on how the big companies are involved, it may also lead to some antitrust investigation, but that's far too early yet. In Europe, it's somewhat different. The commission, the current commission, or the commission that is now leaving, they were very active with many lawsuits against large American companies and so on and so forth. But to sum it up, what I just said, the US approach is more relaxed. The EU approach and AI, the AI Act is in effect since August 1st. So it's much more a regulatory approach.
Thank you, Sven. Second question, which opportunities and challenges do you foresee for European and especially Italian business, which use AI to compete in the USA market?
Well, I think, first of all, any company has to see whether the European regulatory environment will affect them. And that probably has to be done by an attorney. And that shows you that this is especially difficult for small and medium-sized companies. They're usually run by the CEO, and it's a small organization frequently, and you don't have the resources to read this legislation and then see if it applies to you. So that's the first step that has to be taken. And whenever it has an effect on Europe or is done from European territory, then it is obvious that the AI Act applies. Now, there is maybe a way for Italian companies and other European companies to somehow get around it when they set up a subsidiary in the US that is registered in one of the 50 states, and they can then operate as an American company, and are also in the US regarded as a US company. But you still always have to see how does it affect the relationship with Europe, and is the AI Act applicable? So it's difficult, and that leads to another problem for Europe with the AI Act, that it curtails innovation, and people may be less interested because they're afraid they might violate the AI Act to invest. So it's really the opposite what should happen in Europe. In Europe, investments should be made also from foreign companies so that the economies grow.
Okay. And how do the legislative and the regulatory difference between EU and USA in the matter of privacy and data protection influence the use of AI in transatlantic trading?
Well, I mean, also in the US, there's more concern, but not as much as in Europe about privacy. So that is a question that's part of what the executive order of the president is investigating. But it's just a tedious measure that the AI Act creates for companies, because they have to really look at all these issues and see if they may violate the AI Act, and are then subject to penalties that they may have to pay. It's like with the GDPR. There are also, when you violate this part of the EU legislation, then you're also subject to penalties, and depending on the size of the company and so on and so forth. But it's a risk, and obviously people, especially business people, also like to avoid the risks, and so it just makes business and life more complicated for companies.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, and which are the main differences regarding the adoption or implementation of AI in European and USA business in the international trade context?
Well, it's pretty much what I just said. It's the fundamental difference is the US first wants to see how things play out before they then act. And when they act, they might act in a hard way, but they first need to know how are businesses using it, how does it affect the parties involved. Well, in Europe, there's already legislation, and the Europeans said, we are first to have a legislation, but what does it mean we're first? In my view, I think it's it's nice to say, and they're very happy to say we're first, but the other countries, like the US, like China, they don't have such a regimen yet. And that's why they are better off. The US is the leader in AI, I mean, by far. And then China uses AI to a large extent to just survey their people, what they're doing, so to control them really. And that's not the goal in the US, but so there are differences. But those two countries are going to continue, and others that have similar objectives. So Australia is going to obviously go ahead and implementing AI. And then one has to see what it means. I mean, I read an article late last night where the author said, this is like the Industrial Revolution. It will lead to war, so very much against AI. But that's not the point. I mean, we're also today in an environment where things are discussed much more, and where I guess we can see what are the negative effects of AI. So, and with the AI, we shouldn't forget that the input for AI always comes from the participants. So there is nothing that AI develops by itself at the moment. It may change when we have generative AI, but it's a slow process. And people first have to become familiar with the current AI. But as I said, it's always the input is existing data that is then used to come to decisions that were done before. But based on the data, the computer can now do it when the information is put into it. And the other thing is what people don't talk about, that we need huge data centers to be able to do this. And that's not a big PC in your office. That's a huge building with supercomputers. And those supercomputers, they use a lot of energy. Large amounts of energy, so that's another issue. And then they also need cooling. Now, whether that is done with air conditioning or with large amounts of water, or so. So there is an environmental effect also of AI that one has to keep in mind. These data centers, the leading country is the United States, where it's a huge capacity already, and more will be built to be able to compute all these amounts of data. The second largest are Great Britain and Germany. Interestingly enough, they are also, but by far, it's still much less than in the United States. And then of the European countries, Italy is about in the middle segment. So it needs to build up more data centers to really take part in AI.
Thank you. And how do you see the impact of the European GDPR on the development and implementation of AI systems, especially for the conduct of business with the USA?
Well, I mean, it always goes back to the question, what can you do, what you're allowed to do? And that has to be reviewed by most likely an attorney, because for an individual, for an owner of a small and medium-sized business, it may not be his competence, number one. And secondly, it takes up a lot of time. I mean, if you have to read hundreds of pages, and not just read them, but understand them to see what you can do. So that, I think, is a roadblock for European companies, that they're reluctant and say, well, we better not do anything because we don't know whether we violate the law.
Yes. And how is AI changing the supply chain dynamic intercurrent between you and USA business?
Well, I think the obviously the people who operate container ships, planes, and so on, they implement AI because they know what they can do and what they can't do. And so they have advanced warnings when something happens that it may delay their supply. So I think they're certainly using it and have to use it, but they're large operations. So the question is, how do small and medium-sized businesses who rely on a functioning supply chain, how can they know about it? How can they be informed? And that's something that then they have to try to set up. The one thing that is important today is that the flow of information is much faster than it was even 5 years ago. And so with social media and other sources, it's easier to obtain information, what is happening. Obviously, you don't know when there is some kind of an incident that is unexpected, whether that's a big storm or let's say a boat, a ship, a vessel being attacked in the Persian Gulf. Those are things that you cannot predict. You can assume that it might happen, but you can't predict it. And then when it happens, but when it happens, the information usually travels very fast.
Thank you. And which are the future perspectives for the integration of AI in trades between EU and USA, taking into account the different regulatory approaches?
Well, I think we will see whether there is a disadvantage for Europe because of the AI regulation. There may be also further discussions between the US and Europe to see what the common ground is, and whether perhaps it is possible to agree on a common ground that may not be so restrictive as the AI Act. So it would be a revision of the AI Act, but that's possible. And then it may be easier for all participants to use AI. It is an ongoing process. It's clear that AI can benefit the users because it's in principle, the way it's used mostly today is based on existing decisions, so decisions made by people. AI, usually it's implied it will kill jobs, but that's most likely not the case. It will even create new jobs because you need people to kind of answer, to ask the right questions to AI so that then they get good information, solid information based on past experience. That's what one always has to remember.
Thank you. And how is the current AI rush between EU, USA, and China influencing global international trade?
Well, the US is moving very fast, and that's also in the interest of the US government because they want to keep their really outstanding leadership role. There's no question about that. So if you talk about a rush, there's a rush in the US, I think, to continue to build it out, to improve it, make it easier to some extent for the user, the end user. In China, there is a government interest to probably improve certain areas that are not necessarily related to trade. And Europe is unfortunately in a bad position because the Europeans can benefit of AI to the extent that other countries can, that have not such restrictive legislation in place. So yes, the countries that are not bound by the AI Act will have economic benefits, and they will move ahead at the speed that they indicate. In the US, the money spent on AI to develop it further is double what it is in Europe, more or less. I mean, so that shows you that the Europeans haven't understood yet what it means to use AI. Perhaps the new commission, when it is finally in place, will change that and will push for better economic conditions. But at the moment, and the US is the #1 economy in the world. China is kind of #2, but has problems. And Europe is shrinking in some countries.
Okay, thank you. And now, Sven, my personal curiosity, what could be the different sentiment, the different approach of Donald Trump or Kamala Harris about AI? What do you think about?
Well, what I've been saying lately is Donald Trump is a businessman.
Yes.
So he will look at what does it mean for doing business. Is there a benefit for doing business? On the other hand, Harris, and even before she became a candidate, had made statements where she was in favor of AI. So I don't think it's going to be a dramatic issue. Whoever becomes president, they will both move ahead, supporting AI developments, supporting the companies who do it, keeping in mind the executive order that I mentioned at the beginning, that the agencies in the US government review what effect it has on their activities. So it's not an issue that is on the top of my concerns as far as what is the next president going to do. There are other issues that are more important.
Thank you very much, Sven. I thank you for the interview. It was a great honor for me to have you to talk about AI, and I hope I see you soon. Okay.
No, and if in case any questions come up or so, feel free to send them to me.
Yes.
If somebody wants some, I don't know, more detailed answers, but it's difficult because also companies don't talk about what they do.
Yes. This is a problem. Yes, this is a problem because in this moment, for me, is a moment. But in this moment, the companies are very difficult to talk about this item. Very.
But again, thank you for having me. It was an honor for me.
Thank you, Sven.
And be happy to do something else some other time. Maybe after the election we can talk.
Yeah. Yeah. See you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye, Sven.
Bye bye.
Ecco, allora oggi abbiamo avuto questo bellissimo colloquio con Sven Oehme e vorrei fare una considerazione finale per riassumere il contenuto delle risposte di Sven, perché secondo me il punto cruciale è la regolamentazione che noi ci siamo preoccupati di dare in Europa. Di tutte quante le conseguenze che possono esserci, che possono essere connesse con l'intelligenza artificiale, in realtà potrebbe rappresentare un freno per noi rispetto agli Stati Uniti, che invece investono soprattutto con le loro società, e questo è il punto, no? E questo che ha sottolineato Sven. Potrebbe essere effettivamente un freno per l'Europa, la regolamentazione stessa. Grazie a tutti per l'attenzione e insieme al mio fantastico collega Alberto ci vedremo a breve. Arrivederci.